Just to start, two things. We have a very substantial PowerPoint. So I saw people, valiantly trying to take pictures of the various presentations. The association has it, so they can give you a copy afterwards. So it should relax your fingers. Also, if we can hold questions to the end, they got it too. We really don't have time, exactly. My point is we're going to do a very quick one through. There's a bunch of content here which we won't get to, but you'll be able to see it later. Robert, did you want to start with your? Let me just do the introduction, I guess. Oh no, you'll do the circle.
I'll do it. Yeah. I did a quick overview of some of the countries to see whether we are at the same level. And the answer is globally, we are not. We're going to talk in detail about EU and Canada. The UK, we've got a general election coming up in July. All legislation has stopped. Interestingly, there has only been brief discussion about an AI Act in the UK. A few months ago, the government said, what we'd like is a light touch approach. We don't want to be over-engineering the law. We're going to leave it to regulators like the Data and Marketing Commission, like the Bar Council, like the Faculty Office of the Notaries, to tell their members what is ethical and unethical, what is responsible in the use of AI. And that is happening at a practical level, but there is no law. Probably the GDPR is as close as anything that regulates AI and copyright and IP laws in the UK. If we look at USA, there's a mix of executive orders, initiatives. California, now Colorado, have got AI legislation. China was fairly early on in bringing out AI regulation. Australia has got initiatives underway. India colloquially says it wants to be the AI garage. It would like developers to safely play with AI in India, but as yet it doesn't have a law. Israel has got various initiatives. Japan has a national AI strategy. The UAE set up an AI ministry in 2017. So people are at, just in those examples, different levels. One of the things that interested me out of the previous two speakers' presentation was that the law, when we look at it, and the risks are practically very far apart. What we're going to bring out here in this somewhat detailed presentation is the law goes into great detail. I just worry as to how and when it will be interpreted. And in the meanwhile, AI keeps rushing on, and the law is bound to lag behind. At the risk of just going off-piste, I love that reference to hallucination. I did a talk to the notaries regulator a few months ago, and I said, we are actual intelligence. But we as humans hallucinate. I remember in the second year of my law degree, I couldn't think of a case to support an argument that I was making in my paper, so I made one up. It read really well. That summer, I met my lecturer in the streets, and he said, "Bond, I'm glad I've met you. That case you referred to in your answer didn't exist, did it?" And I said, no. And he said, "I thought so. I gave you an extra mark."
All right. So, as Robert was alluding to, different jurisdictions are at different stages In Canada, the way that the Artificial Intelligence and Data Act has developed is actually part of Bill C-27. Bill C-27 has taken our previous privacy legislation from 2001-2003, originally, PIPEDA, and has basically turned it into a form of GDPR, but not perfectly. And you'll see as we go through this presentation, there's a lot of similarities with respect to that. Bill C-27 introduces a bunch of GDPR-sized fines. You'll see that our Artificial Intelligence and Data Act, which is part of this big omnibus legislation, also has GDPR-sized fines. As I was indicating, it has been heavily influenced by the European Union. Robert's going to be talking about the EU AI Act, and I'm going to be talking about Canada. As usual here, the devil is in the details, because you end up thinking that because some of the categories are the same, they have a tiered risk system in both pieces of legislation by way of example, but it really is the details because they're not exactly the same. And there's recently been a companion document which is helping understand the legislation. Most significantly, though, is the last line. They completely redid it with a series of amendments in November 2023. And one of the things I'll talk about very quickly later is, for some odd reason, the requirement for autonomy, for autonomous thought or semi-autonomous action, has been removed, which is why it was very interesting to have the presentation before us, because they added it. So I'm not sure whether the definition actually makes any sense. You'll see in a second by removing autonomous. So that's where we are on that one. It's hopefully going to come into place this year. So, Robert.
Yeah, and now we've got the AI Act in the EU. The EU has been quite rightly marketing the fact that it is the first jurisdiction to have AI law. It's still not enforceable. So there is a period, as you can see, before it is effective. We know what it's going to be, but on the basis of the tweaks that we've already seen since 21 and the comments from the previous speakers, I wouldn't mind betting that by 2025 we will see some yet further changes. The devil, as John has said, is in the detail. Okay.
Of course, one of the great challenges is for enterprises that are in the space to, develop, distribute artificial intelligence products or products which have artificial intelligence in them. Because to your point about there being ongoing changes, I would hate to be a developer in this stage because the law has just wildly changed over a period of 12 months. So it makes it very difficult. Purposes of the EU AI Act.
Yeah. As we say up there, it's to improve functioning of the internal EU market and promote the uptake of trustworthy AI. Love the reference to human-centric. Protection, again, of health, safety, fundamental rights. So there is that crossover with GDPR. And let's not forget that when we talk about fundamental rights of the individual, we're talking about human rights and human dignity. So there's naturally a link back to unexpected outcomes or outcomes that might impact an individual or a sector of society. So we are bound to need due diligence around the training and the quality and so on. And yes, it is also there to support innovation.
So on our side, it doesn't expressly reference innovation, but what it does talk about is because this is federal legislation, it's under a constitutional international interprovincial trade and commerce power. So basically the point is they want to have a single standard across the country because we have 13 different jurisdictions in Canada. So implicitly it's to support innovation, which is consistent across the board. Same point with respect to harm. As in both pieces of legislation, there's a heavy emphasis on harm avoidance. All right, so this is the one for INAIDA where in the latest amendments, which just came out in November of last year, they deleted autonomously or partially autonomously. So now the definition of artificial intelligence system is simply a technological system that, using a model, makes inferences, to Menno's question about the reference to infer in the EU AI Act, in order to generate output, including predictions, recommendations, or decisions. I get somewhat worried that is a very broad definition and would unintentionally capture a number of other mechanisms which don't technically, in my view, constitute AI. So that would be my concern. The newest amendments also reference a general purpose system, which is basically a multifunctional AI system, and the machine learning model. In contrast, for Europe.
Yeah, so we've got the definitions that you saw in the earlier slides. We've got new language being added in to deal with general purpose AI systems and general purpose AI models. In practice, what I am seeing with developers is people scratching their heads to say when is a system and when is a model. And we are desperate for detailed guidance. It isn't there. So we have just got a blank sheet of paper in practice and an awful lot of small print.
Yeah, 100%. Ours is heavily reliant on regulations to come, which doesn't reassure businesses that are trying to figure out how to comply. And of course, that's only in our jurisdiction. So if you're trying to roll out a product globally, and we have wildly different definitions of what artificial intelligence system even is, it makes it even more difficult. Okay, application in the public sector. So in Canada, it doesn't apply to government institutions, any federal department, ministry, or any crown corporations that get a complete pass.
And in the EU, it does.
Applies, there is exceptions for AI systems used for military purposes, because that makes a lot of sense. So, guess they didn't watch Terminator.
And similarly for the EU.
Yeah, exactly. Research is exempt under ADA.
Yeah, and it doesn't apply to research systems in the EU either.
I do like the sole purpose in yours. I wish you had it in ours.
Do you know, can I just go back one? One of the interesting things we're seeing is in the UK, our new data protection and digital services bill, which unfortunately is dead now because of the election, talked about the ability to not need consent from individuals when using technology for scientific research. And the way it used the word scientific was not in science bodies, it was if it has an element of science to the research, it's scientific, which is basically any analytics at all. You do not need consent. That was quite scary. In a way, as an individual, I'm quite glad that bill is dead. Okay.
Wow. As I noted, we both have a tier risk-based approach, but again, devil being in the details, we have one risk level, high-impact AI systems, not to be confused with the high-risk impact systems. So we only have the one risk level.
And then we have the 4, which are up there, with, again, a lack of devil in the detail as to when you're in one or another. And so in that cyber resilience talk that we had earlier, there was the need to do a risk assessment. I think we are in a world where you will need an assessment manual because you're going to be assessing this and assessing that and assessing the other.
Between conformity assessments and privacy impact assessments, and then this assessment.
Legitimate interest assessments.
Yeah, they're going to have an assessment officer.
Are we doing questions at the end?
There would be questions at the end if we could. With respect to unacceptable risk AI systems, we don't have any. So I'm short on this one. Go.
Yeah, so if it's unacceptable, it contravenes EU values. So if it's anything that infringes the fundamental rights of individuals, uses something that is deep, not obvious, might infer emotion. I mean, if you think a classic one would be psychometric testing that is using untrained AI that will impact somebody's ability to win a job or not, unacceptable risk. But you've got to do an assessment as the manufacturer or indeed the user to understand, are we using something with an unacceptable risk?
And then we have high impact, high risk AI systems. Ours, as I said, is high impact. And under the EU Act, it's high risk.
Yep.
We're going to talk about these in a bit more detail later, so not spend a lot of time on this slide. I will certainly simply say that, at least under ADA, basically there's a list of intended uses which would reasonably fall within this category. One of them is employment. I believe the Colorado legislation is focused solely on the employment context and the delightful US pattern of doing very sectoral specific legislation. And also you have certain listed AI systems as well.
Yep.
Okay, now in terms of requirements, we're not going to go through each one of these, but you can see that there are a lot of similarities between them, but enough differences where it becomes dangerous again. So by way of example, we have transparency in both. We have notification requirements, we have data requirements / data governance requirements. So a lot of similarities with respect to the actual requirements, but some key differences. And that was for high impact, high risk AI systems. Then we go to the general purpose systems or general purpose AI models, again, system versus model. And you can see there's some overlap, but there's quite some significant differences there. So it makes it very difficult for enterprises to try and comply with this in multiple different jurisdictions. This is only two.
Can I just say that, and confirm to me that what I'm saying is right for ADA, is we mustn't forget the EU law is extraterritorial, much like the GDPR. So it doesn't matter where your business is in the world, if it is actively putting AI models or systems into the EU market, then EU law applies. And is the same for you? Okay.
Prohibited AI practices. You already touched on this.
on that one.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay. I like this, the first one, though. It's the Manchurian candidate one. Totally dated myself. Then we have me, none.
Yep.
We do not have any prohibited ones. This is perhaps one we should spend a bit more time on. Is how we define high impact versus high risk systems. So in Europe.
Yep. So if it's high risk, the AI system is intended to be used as part of a safety component of a product, or is in itself a product covered by union harmonization legislation. Either one, the safety component is the AI system, or the AI system itself is a product. Then there has to be conformity assessments before it is placed on the market. We're seeing something being developed now called a model card. So some of the AI developers are putting out a conformity card that says this meets this standard, this meets that standard, etc. But some of them I am seeing are very either light on content and seem to be pulled off a template somewhere, or at the other end of the scale, we've got AI developers that are putting their entire business at risk by making statements that will come back to bite them, because somebody will say, I contracted with you on the basis of that statement and you lied and I am suing. And we haven't talked about it yet, but in the back of my head, I am constantly thinking, I wonder what my client's insurance does in terms of the risk, and have the brokers, has the insurance market woken up, and are we going to see a whole load of rewriting of policies? Sorry to...
No, I think the answer is yes. Yes, the second part, they haven't woken up, but yes. This is the second part of it, where you actually have the enumerated list. And this one's useful because if you compare it to the Canadian one, so for high impact, so under ADA, employment decisions, this is not a surprise. This has been a hot button topic for the application of AI. Determination as to whether to provide services, what types of services are going to be provided, the cost of those services, how those services are going to be prioritized, who receives them, who doesn't. That would be considered to be a high impact risk. Biometrics, not a shock there. This one is troubling. Moderation or prioritization of online content. That is considered to be a high impact systems risk. That is hard to get your head around, because that's what AI is perhaps one of the best things it's suited for, which doesn't seem to be that harmful, but it is listed as a risky one. And I don't believe you have that one in yours. Healthcare emergency services, excluding certain medical devices. Of course, any use by a court administrative body, we all heard the stories of cases that don't exist. Even though you were advanced in your time, you just made it up. Assistance to a peace officer, so what we'd call the police, that would also be considered to be a high-risk system. Now, obligations, we're going to probably skip through quite quickly because our time is limited. I'll do a couple examples.
Yeah. So I sort of referred to this earlier. If you are the manufacturer or user of a high-risk system, then you have got to address compliance, accountability, transparency, and genuinely produce an audit trail as to how you assessed the risk, what checks and balances you might put in place, etc. So this is going to be a huge area, if it isn't already, for anybody that is a manufacturer, or indeed any of us who start using this stuff in the workplace. Okay.
Do you want to talk about just that?
So, well, I sort of alluded to it. By data governance, I mean we need to have an entire governance system that includes accountability, manages risks, have an audit trail as to why you decided. So there is quite a lot of stuff that I've been developing for clients of mine where we've used the concepts we already know in privacy impact assessments, in data protection impact assessments, and start to develop something that becomes used, as one of the other speakers said today, before you start the implementation. The earlier you start this, sometimes when we apply ethics by design, it may be just because we can doesn't necessarily mean we should, is something I would always have at the back of my mind. Okay.
Well, just to be positive as well, I mean, we have the advantage of having learned how to do privacy impact assessments. Mm-hmm. So this is not brand new stuff for us, and I think we can utilize some of those learnings. Transparency, human oversight, accuracy, robustness, quality management, documentation keeping goes on and on and on and on. And that was just for the high impact ones. Now there's for general purpose.
Yeah, so again, it's not dissimilar. And frankly, I'm now seeing a sort of what I would call a pre-screening template that I've developed, where you're effectively saying, as compliance or legal, what are you intending to do? I want a complete description of what it is. Maybe in 2 pages, I can come to a decision that this is not high risk, that this is not unacceptable, that this is a general purpose. Risk minimization comes down. But it could be that in half an hour, I've decided this is deeply disturbing, and what marketing or innovation thinks is fair and reasonable, you would be saying at compliance level, no, not right now, not like this. But when things go wrong, if you can pull this out of the bottom drawer, you'll be much robustly able to look a regulator in the face and say, we didn't do this lightly, we thought it through, here's the methodology, etc. So this is all logical, protective stuff that we would do for other types of our business anyway. So it shouldn't be burdensome, but it needs to be there.
Okay, AIDA. So AIDA gets a little complicated because all this has been so wonderfully simple by dividing things up into 3 brackets. And so for our clients, we have to determine which one of these buckets they fall into with respect to their systems. So let's talk about general purpose systems. There's obligations that apply, and I'll give you some examples in a second. If you make available general purpose systems for the first time, you got one set of obligations. If you're simply making available general purpose systems not for the first time, there are other obligations. And if you're managing the operations of general purpose systems, you have another set of obligations. Then it goes to machine learning models. If you're making available a machine learning model for the first time, you have a certain set, for incorporation in a high impact system, then you have a certain set of obligations. If you're not doing it for the first time, you have a different set of obligations. And finally, for high impact systems, if you make them available for the first time, you see the pattern, not the first time, or just managing the operations. And to make things additionally delightful, you can have a general purpose system which is also a high impact system. And IATA expressly says you can have one which is both. So the first thing, one of the things I liked about Anna's slides is how do you comply piece. One of the first things you have to do on that chain of how you comply is have your clients figure out where they lie in this. Because it's not just going to be one, right? Because let's say I do make it available the first time, so I do all the comply, and then I keep making it available, so I have the other ones that also apply, and then we do the assessment and confirm that's a high impact system, so I have another bunch of obligations which apply as well. One of the more interesting obligations, which I will touch upon, is changes. Because one of the things that resonated about what Robert was just saying is that doing the assessment is not a one-time thing. Because to the extent that your system changes significantly, then the change system is considered to be a new system, and that means you have to do a new assessment of what the risks are, mitigation measures, whether the plain language description, because remember there's a transparency obligation, whether your plain language description of what that system does is still accurate, or is your system changed enough that it has to be revised again, and then there's additional measures which are going to be prescribed by regulation as well. So this is not a one-time journey. This is something you're going to be doing along your product roadmap. So, what are we doing for time? Yeah. I just wanted to give you a bit of an example as to what these look like. So if you have a general purpose system, making it available the first time, and there's a lot of duplication between these obligations. Data requirements, risk assessment requirements, all of these resonate because they're very similar to the AI Act. Mitigation measures, human oversight, again. Transparency, again. Generative capabilities, and additional measures which may be prescribed by regulation. Record keeping, of course, which is so critical. And it goes on and on and on. So again, key issue is where do you end up on that line? Are you managing, are you making it available the first time, or are you just making it available? As I said, there's a lot of content here. Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to say on the penalties, we've got stuff that looks very similar to GDPR and competition law fines. So it's the higher of a fixed sum or turnover or annual revenues. Looks great on paper. I'm not quite sure how much it will scare major operators, because at the moment, if you look at this type of language from GDPR, we haven't seen big fines, I mean maximum fines against pretty appalling breaches. And indeed, we're seeing some oddities where the fines that are big are generally against the big commercial operators. They're never against big government departments. And it's often government departments that are playing fast and loose with technology. So I don't know, some of the folks that I'm advising, big commercial operators, they're more concerned about having the compliance in place than about what will happen if it goes wrong. Because some of these fines, when they are issued, they are an intent to fine, and you end up appealing them. We've seen that within GDPR, et cetera, so it looks like a big stick. I'm not convinced that it necessarily will bring the bad players to order.
Yeah. Okay, so under IATA, yeah, some of these are going to be set up by regulations, which is one of the great frustrations. But I think this is more helpful. So leaving aside AMPs, we have AMPs, of course, they have fines for offenses. And this list of offenses is fairly broad. If you look at this list, and you remember that other slide I was showing you, that the three buckets, general purpose system, machine learning models, and high impact system, those align pretty closely with this. So it's a pretty broad range of triggers. I take Robert's point with respect to the fines, and honestly, it's hard not to be cynical about this arms race to have bigger and bigger fines on every new piece of legislation just to show how important it is. And that's a problem that we're having as well. But this is the section that would keep my clients up at night, is this one, because that is a very close alignment. I'll use a comparison. Under our old privacy legislation, Canada PIPEDA, the maximum fine was $100,000. Remember the old days when there were small fines? And that was for pretty egregious behavior. That was like punishing a whistleblower, by way of example. Now, under the new privacy legislation in Canada, and very similar, the artificial intelligence legislation, the alignment of fines with respect to the obligations is no longer egregious behavior, it's basically everything. That is a long list of obligations for which you can be penalized. And honestly, even when you don't get hit with the big fines, it's still a big problem. I will say this, I'm not sure how prevalent it is here, but certainly there's been an increasing number of class actions which shareholders are bringing against their boards if they get fined with these things. So it's something that really needs to be brought to the attention of the board, and I'm sure this is a very big topic at the board level right now. Anyway, many fines, and again, the equally scary fines are admittedly Canadian dollars, so a little less. But again, similar sizes. So.
Okay.
The one thing, oh yeah, please. Oh, okay, I thought you were waving. Well, you already talked about the fact that basically in the UK, it doesn't really help because it's broken up in piece. One of the interesting things that we're sort of looking into, and actually refers back to the presentation just before ours, is how do these requirements align with product liability? Like the general principles of product liability, because I'm a little less sanguine about how they line up with product liability principles. And doing it we have a product liability group, as many firms would, and we'd like to do an alignment between what the principles are for product liability for the developer, for the distributor, manufacturer, et cetera, and how that lines up with the obligations here. Because I'm not sure that they do align that well, and it's too early to do the assessment because ours is still a work in progress. So, and you think there's still going to be changes to the European one?
Yeah, I do. Having said that, on a practical level, if there was one thing I would take away from this session, it's the fact that probably in your organization there is already what the British Computer Society referred to the other day as stealth AI. It's the you and me that is already playing around with ChatGPT in the workplace. Your marketing team wants to put out a new proposal. They're going to feed the machine. You're doing research for litigation purposes. You feed the machine. I might want to, indeed I asked ChatGPT, is it able to help me write notarial certificates? It very kindly told me that it was not appropriately qualified. It didn't carry appropriate insurance. If I had, however, said, have a go at doing this, and given client information, I have breached my code of practice. And you think, the one thing I should be getting off my seat and doing right now is training my staff to understand that surreptitiously, by playing with this, they could bring our business down. So we don't need a huge big piece of legislation to raise that risk. It is here yesterday, the day before. We probably already messed up. Sorry.
And on that cheerful note, that concludes our presentation. Do we have any time for questions, or are we done like dinner?
It's up to you whether you want to have lunch now or not.
Ask the audience.
Okay, in that case, we'll have 5 minutes for questions. Who would like to
Answer.
Please.
John, two questions. One, the exception for the government regarding AI regulation is a bit peculiar from my point of view, because if AI regulation is primarily directed at preserving human rights, these are defensive rights against the government. So the government takes an exception, looks peculiar.
Oh, I wildly agree. There is a history of having public sector, by way of example, we have public sector privacy legislation, we have private sector privacy legislation. The rules are quite different. So at least in Canada, we do have a pattern whereby we have one set of rules for public sector, one set of rules for the private sector. How we can completely exempt them boggles the mind.
You mean in due course of time there might be a parallel legislation?
There may well be. That's right.
And then one practical question, the high impact system. If I read your definition, ChatGPT is a high impact system. It prioritizes information which it gets online from the internet.
It's very unclear. It's very unclear. Not a helpful answer, I know, but the problem is, as the point was made earlier, some of these definitions are so turgid. When you actually apply it to a real life example, it's hard to tell. But I agree with you.
It's a bit like most products.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the product that makes it high risk. It's the
use of it.
Yeah, product.
Yeah.
Imagine using ChatGPT in a hospital. Well, you can think of lots of
For prescriptions, yes. Good point.
No. Sorry, lady at the back.
First of all, thank you so much for the comparison. It was really helpful. Although I think we could talk like 2 hours.
Yes.
Compare it really in detail. Now it's more clear to me why Canada has become such an interesting market for AI. Most of investments in like new companies in AI goes to Canada, and that might be highly likely because of the regulation. You have just one risk layer and not four.
Not four. Could be.
Who's the market authority there? And is it an authority that's more open-minded, issues more guidelines? What is your secret that
I don't think you'll find any lure that says we have very little regulation. The regulatory framework is going to be a commissioner, which oversees it, very similar to a privacy commissioner. And of course, for you, it would be the different states. Any other questions?
In that case, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.